Sad stories. Whether you love sad stories or hate them, they have been a staple in our storytelling from ancient Greece to the sad dog movies of the late 2000s. We tell sad stories to each other. But why? Why do we tell them? What do they do to us? And do we really need them? Or can we live off happy stories alone? The first question that needs to be answered is, what makes a story sad? I originally had dedicated half of the video length to explaining this point, but then I realized we all have a fairly consistent idea of what makes a sad story, and most of the time it's simply loss. Whether it's loss of a loved one, loss of freedom, loss of physical well-being, or sometimes loss of meaning. When something that we esteem as necessary for a happy existence is ripped away from the main character, we are left feeling incomplete. Essentially, a sad story is this: the movement of a character from having a complete, whole life to having something or someone missing. And conversely, a happy story is one where a character gains something they didn't have before. We cheer as they gain freedom, victory, a romantic relationship, or meaning. Everyone loves a good, happy movie. One where the hero completes their task, finding meaning, heroic purpose, and most times, also meaningful friendships and romance along the way. We love these stories because they make us feel good. They give us hope for the future. Right? Let me start off my criticism by saying I have no intention of bashing happy stories. This whole video is about how we need both, and we run risks if we crowd out one with the other. I deeply believe that a well-told story with a happy ending can be truly inspiring, giving us renewed vision for life, personal goals, hope, and appreciation of the people around us. There's a great deal of value in taking in stories with happy endings, but there's also a great deal of risk if these are the only stories we consume. There's a human tendency to want things to be well, to be complete, to be happy. But what we see in much of the mainstream media today is an almost compulsive need to have all our stories end this way. Now, I want to clarify. Like I previously stated, there's nothing wrong with a happy ending. That is, if it's earned. But too many stories don't even make an effort, instead relying on narrative shortcuts like final hour savior tropes and airport chase scenes, just to make sure everything turns out alright. But the problem is that we, the audience, are all too aware that if these same stories played out in real life, they wouldn't end so well. Because here's the kicker. Watching these stories which shouldn't end well turn out alright over and over again slowly disconnects us from the world of the movie. And what should have been a story that gives us hope just feels disconnected from reality. As we compare ourselves to these perfect protagonists who can jump through fire and emerge unscathed, we begin to feel hopelessness. You see, a happy ending at the cost of authenticity isn't a happy ending at all. And I think deep down, all of us recognize this. This cost of authenticity appears often in the romantic film genre. We feel good as we are pulled along by the narrative that tells us that this set of characters are supposed to be together. But if we really sat down and thought about it, we wouldn't be able to articulate why these characters are actually compatible. The happiness is rushed or gained without being earned in a narrative sense. But in life, you can't rush something sincere or genuine. Oftentimes, the holes in our stories are filled very slowly and very authentically. And this is part of what makes us human. The imperfection and the incompleteness combined with a hope to one day be complete. Trying to rush things or hurrying to make things good again often leads us to our only other option, self-delusion, which, ironically, is what these movies often help us to do. And this is where sad stories come in. So, incomplete happiness isn't happiness at all, it's just delusion. And this is why I think so many of us like sad stories. They throw chaos at the false sense of order. They critique the unrealistic happiness, calling it for what it is. They aren't sad for the sake of being sad. They're real. I think stories that are willing to press into sadness are the most committed to happiness of all, because they aren't willing to take shortcuts. Because life is this way. Life is both good and bad, comfortable and uncomfortable, joyful and tragic. This is part of what makes the whole of it beautiful and human. And this really gets down to why sad stories are just so important. Because they help us to accept life as it is. If we only tell ourselves happy stories on the large scale, where everything is perfect and works out perfectly, then we are likely to do that on the small scale as well, in our day-to-day lives. We are bound to become slowly more and more uncomfortable with the imperfect, with the incomplete, and with our lives as they are today. Author C.S. Lewis wrote that comparison is the thief of joy, and I think he was right. As we compare our lives to the ones playing out in front of us, and all we see is unrealistic bliss, we are more likely to grow discontented and frustrated with life, telling ourselves things should be different. But they shouldn't be different, because they aren't. Things are what they are, and there's really nothing we can do about that except to change our posture towards life, from one of struggling to one of accepting. If we learn to accept the sad endings where things don't turn out as we want, when we learn to become comfortable with the uncomfortable, we learn to embrace the imperfect. We learn to try to not rush life into a state of pure bliss, but accept it as it comes to us, and more importantly, to accept others as they come to us, and ultimately to accept ourselves as we are. And this, accepting sadness and imperfection, ironically, is what ends up creating genuine happiness. If we are all being honest with each other, there are few among us who would say that they are exactly where they want to be, where they imagine themselves as the curtain closes on their lives. We tend to think if our lives ended today, they would be incomplete, a sad story. But is this because we are living sad and disappointing stories? Or is it because we are comparing our lives to the dopamine-filled shells that flicker across the screens? This really doesn't only apply to movies or books. You can see this kind of unrealistic storytelling on social media and in YouTuber vlogs. We want life to be different, but it isn't. And accepting a good, sad story teaches us to be okay with that. Sad endings help us to accept things as they are, and to be fully present, and in my experience, see the bad and incomplete as being more beautiful. It helps us try not to force things to be different, which often isolates us from contentment with life, separates us from others through us pushing them away in judgment, and even isolates us from ourselves, and from feelings of self-acceptance and self-love because of shame, disappointment, or worse, by disconnecting from ourselves completely because we just can't stand who we are, that we aren't like the person on the screen. Now, this doesn't mean that we celebrate bad things. There are terrible things in this world and in our lives that never should have happened. This video isn't about celebrating those things, and this video isn't about giving up hope that things will get better. It's about honestly orienting us to where we are on the path today, so that we can see things as they really are, accept the journey ahead of us, and take the next step. By being willing to tell sad stories, we offer up empathy. The only thing worse than suffering is doing so alone. And hearing someone else's story, which is just as broken as yours, brings mutual comfort and pain. We can help heal each other, not by trying to make our stories look happy and skipping the bad parts, but by being honest and vulnerable, by telling sad stories. And maybe, someday, someone will hear our sad stories and not feel so alone. And it's for all these reasons that I think sad stories are some of the most important in the world. Thanks for watching.